Hey everybody, welcome back to the Pre-Hospital Paradigm Podcast. I'm Scott Wildenheim. My usual crew over here to my right, I've got Ray Pace and I got Dr. John Hill down there. And welcoming back our guest for this month, Falon Steiner, who is our manager of all initial education in the UH sphere of training and all of our multiple programs. We are here live with the UH Parma Paramedic Program, and who actually wasn't even supposed to be here tonight. You guys came in special for this. We appreciate that greatly, and we look forward to some great questions about EMS education from you all tonight. And of course, before we really get into everything, we've got the usual housekeeping stuff. We've got to, of course, thank FirstNet and Cradlepoint, who are our routine sponsors here. FirstNet, Cradlepoint is the hardware and the network that all of this gets streamed out over. And again, we have to big shout out to them for giving us the equipment and the network to make all of this possible. Everything that we're doing here has already been recorded throughout the month and played throughout the month. So if this is kind of the first bit you're getting of this, we're going to get kind of a summary of things we talked about here today. We're going to focus in on the stuff the students really want to hear here in a little bit. And but again, you can go back and watch the first 3 episodes, and you can find that at prehospitalparadigm.com along with all the show notes and everything else regarding EMS education. It's all packed into that web page. Web page on there for this particular episode. So go check out that. Go check out that, and all of our historic material is there, along with. There's several other pieces in the free open access education that UH does. So we've got 2 weekly products that go out in medical director minutes. All of that's cataloged there. Our Pharmacy Fridays, all of the medications in your drug box, and even some more. There's write-ups on all of that. It's available, again, prehospitalparadigm.com. And last kind of piece that we want to throw in there, Dr. Singer from UH Elyria, he spends a tremendous amount of time finding excellent cases and writing up EMS reviews of that. That's on the Great Cases piece on the website. He does an absolute fantastic job. It is all he writes very well and summarizes stuff great. It's probably 5-10 minute read. It's great information, and it's great EMS care, and it's nice to have that portal and all of that work that he puts into it. So if you haven't ever checked that out, real actual cases and their outcomes. Yeah. Again, we appreciate Dr. Singer doing that. So, Falon, welcome back. So when we sat down initially, this is something you and I talked about for a long time, in many respects, on how we could use this platform to get various messages out. And one of the things that we always understood but really never capitalized on was kind of messaging to the students, and the other component of that is messaging to the people that they may be doing ride time with, and that they may be interacting with, because I think one of the things that we're finding is, you got guys that, my age or, our age collectively that, have taken the test and have gone through paramedic school now, 10, 12, 15, 20 plus years ago. In our mind, we're trying to overlay our experience when we're, talking to these guys and communicating with, with them, and so much has changed, and we may actually kind of be misleading them a little bit in many respects. And the first thing I really kind of want to talk about is the structure of the training, how that's changed from 99 when I took my training, and how that was accredited, and who authorized that, to what we're doing today, I'll just flat out say it, the hoops we have to jump through to bring them the education for paramedic training.
Yeah. Agreed. Well, and I think that's something that you guys, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, and can ask questions according to that, but that's something that really doesn't get seen much to the student, right? So you see the instructors, you see the product that's getting delivered, you see the handbook that you have to sign off on, but you don't always understand all the pieces and components behind that development, right? That's a product that's been around for a very long period of time, and has developed over a number of years, but that's not something that me or your instructors or program directors can just sit down and say, hey, you know what, we have this crazy idea, let's just roll with it, right? We have a lot of requirements we have to meet as far as state and accreditation, plus we need you guys ultimately to be successful at the end of the class, right? And all of that while navigating a landscape that is changing, right? And
100%.
we talked about in some of the previous episodes, that's changed a lot even just in the last year. So one of the big changes being hours requirements. There's a lot of flexibility in that now, but we still have to meet a competency-based program. And without anybody telling us, you have to do X amount of hours in the seat as a student, but then now we have to decide how are we going to make you successful from a competency perspective. One of the big things I know you guys probably have heard is registry, right? The big topic for everybody right now is there's a new registry
right.
all across the board.
So all of that accreditation and regulation stuff, kind of walk us through how it was and what it is today, right? So, like you've alluded to, we got voluntold on a lot of stuff, right? It's no longer kind of like how we really care to run the program. Yeah, we've got input, of course, but there's far more structure to what we do today, and far more barriers to clear, right, to put this product out in the world than, frankly, there ever has before, and it just continues to evolve, right?
Yeah, so we carry basically 2 accreditations for a program, and that's for an overarching paramedic program. For an EMT program and a paramedic program, you carry a state accreditation. So you guys are all familiar with the Ohio Department of Public Safety, okay? And they carry the start of the accreditation. So we have to submit to them. They do their own auditing. We do our own reporting. They have a whole, when a net chases you down for information, that information has to go into a state database that we have to say you're in the class. We have to update if you're no longer in the class. We have to update when you pass or fail the class. And then we have to update all the national registry results. After that,
that's not even the high bar to clear.
No.
Yep, not at all.
After that, then for paramedic programs, and they've trialed for advanced programs, is COA, which is accredited by KHAP, which is our overall accrediting body. Now we have to meet state requirements still, which aren't necessarily the same as COAMPS requirements, and then we have to meet their requirements. And they go from what has to be in your handbook down to every individual letter that there is, to what the structure of a syllabus, to the rules for us and what instructors are even given as continuing education or what they have availability to what requirements a clinical site has to meet at every point in the program, what skills you have to do, your clinical hours, because you always love those clinical hours, all the clinical hours you have to complete, what can be simulated versus what absolutely has to be live in the field environment. I mean, they get down to every little piece of that. Then there is big reporting metrics that we have to submit on a regular basis, and then whatever your accreditation cycle ends up being, then they come out and do an in-person audit. And that in-person audit isn't just a sit down with administration and say, show us paperwork. That in-person audit includes you guys in a classroom with the auditors without instructors present saying, how does this program run? How do they do? So it's really a pretty deep dive into maintaining consistency.
One of the things that we talked about on the recorded session, and it blows my mind. You talk about some of the finite and the detail things that they regulate. You're mandated a number of clicks that somebody can go onto our website, a minimum number of clicks to get to the metrics on pass-fail rates and attrition rates and all of that. So there's a whole bunch that goes into the back end, which is far different than when I went to school, and I think even when you went to school, right? I think we were talking on the live, on the recorded, we were talking about yes, I had hours and yes, I had clinical rotations, but if I went to a OB rotation, in the 90s and you didn't catch a kid, well, you didn't catch a kid. I personally made it through an advanced EMT, or it was intermediate EMT class in 97, 98. I never started an IV, and I got put on the road as an intermediate EMT, right? Of course, that would absolutely never fly today, right?
We signed up for clinical hours on a paper calendar.
Yeah, absolutely. May as well just don't tap.
A lot of things that have moved electronic, obviously, for auditing purposes, for security purposes, ease of use for the instructor, ease of use for the student. I mean, these are a lot of technology advances that have helped the program substantially. I mean, AMP was very minor when I went to paramedic school. It was very short, very compact.
You had AMP?
We had a book.
No, I was saying,
We had a book.
I mean,
Yeah,
it was
they gave us a book, and it kind of
intermixed with mine.
It did for like the first couple weeks. AMP kind of filtered in, whereas now it's completely separate. We legitimately signed up on a paper calendar to go do ER time
With a pencil. We talked about that.
yeah,
We signed each other's names out.
Yeah, I mean, it was just but that was the way it was done. I mean, we had all of your reports that were turned into your instructors and your assessments, your innovations. Everything was done with, pen and paper. Like there was no test prep, there was no EMS testing, there was no online scheduling. A lot of these items weren't here that have helped us significantly over the years, I think.
Honestly, that's a great point. That's something we never talked about during the recording, was all of the test prep today, the material, the ability to practice this before going to the National Registry. If my instructor didn't write good questions and didn't prepare us, they had no idea it was on the registry. There wasn't any sample questions for us to...
There's arguably almost too much.
Almost too much.
I mean, guys, when you look out there for test prep, how many options do you see if you're trying to prep for registry?
Every one of them wants a little bit of your money, but
Sure.
they'll help you get through. But yeah, no, that's a great point.
Yeah.
Is that landscape? Technology has changed that landscape greatly. The other thing that changed, kind of, from what I recall, as a young paramedic going through school and then coming up, and I know we talked a bit about this, was the mentorship program and how important that is. Well, first of all, it's mandated, and second of all, the actual importance of that this should not be somebody that is just your buddy signing off on things, right? There is actually intent behind that, far beyond just somebody who is supposed to have some oversight. There's supposed to actually be interaction there, and in my particular case, I just found, by happenstance, a guy that I was doing ride time with that I felt I was comfortable with and learned the best from well into my ride time and well into my schooling, and then just like, okay, kind of de facto became my mentor, right?
Well,
now it's a much more structured thing.
And even without, I mean, you even take that out of the situation, right? This is not something, a year's worth of time, right, is not something you want to endure by yourself. Going into that, it's a lot of hours, right? It's a lot of hours, it's a lot of time, it's a lot of studying, it's a lot of commitment, and the reality of individuals going into a paramedic program and not having other commitments, right? We have life. Everybody that comes into this program is 18 or older. You're adulting, right? And so you need somebody there that's going to be your coach and your cheerleader to help push you through the program and hold you accountable. And that even will develop and change. Yes, you have the ideal mentor and that, but even just understanding that, I think that's a good play into your career too, right? How often do we get into the career and we need that person that says, hey, you're extra cranky this week. You all right? You need a little something? Can we help you out at all, right?
John's talking about you.
I know.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's a lot of what we do in that regard, I think, is also to understanding, and you come back to some of the education too, the way we set some of that up is trying to help set up a successful career and have it in the start.
100%. I mean, you spoke to that that a lot.
Yeah, I
about
think mentorship is huge. Mentorship is huge, and it's not just in paramedic school, and you're going to see that throughout the profession. I remember having a mentor when I was 20-year-old kid going through paramedic school, 19 or 20, and my mentor was my full-time partner at the private ambulance I worked at. So we not only did transfers, we did 911 calls. And that was huge because they lived it, they've done it, they've worked a full-time job and went to school, just like probably a lot of people sitting in this room are doing. They're working a full-time job, maybe they're trying to balance family, home life, work, and a lot of the simple things that a mentor would be like, okay, this is what worked for me. In simple planning, and just to make sure you're using your time in the best appropriate way, I think is huge. Like planning is a big part, but mentorship is huge. That person to be able to bounce ideas off of, to help develop you, and it's not going to just stop after this. A lot of people that enter the fire service as well. So if you're becoming a paramedic and you want to enter the world of fire and EMS, mentorship does not stop. Any type of program you take, I can speak specifically to the Ohio Fire Chiefs, Fire Officer 1 and 2 classes, the Maxwell program, the Ohio Fire Executive OFE program. You have mentorship throughout all of those programs because they are more experienced. They can help you with that. It's balanced. They are there to get on your butt if you're falling behind. And it's also really good that the institution, as university hospitals and paramedic programs, can also create that partnership with the mentor to say, hey, Scott's slacking a little bit. Have you talked to him lately? We want the mentor to be engaged. It's not just a name on a paper, for a lack of a better word, but it's a good resource for you to succeed. It's very important, and you'll see that throughout your whole career. Whether it's strictly just EMS in the EMS profession, or if you go into the fire and EMS profession, it's both. It's huge. I still to this day, I have mentors I still call, ask for help. I mean, we've been on some crazy calls. I'll call Dr. Hill. We'll discuss it. Hey, our guys had this call. This is all the things we did. There's always something to learn. It doesn't matter if you've been a paramedic 25 years or if you've been a paramedic 20 minutes. There's always something to learn. I think that mentorship program is there.
And that kind of dovetails up and abuts all of this. Is you are on a constant interview all of your life at all of the time,
100%.
especially in school, right? And I think more people need to appreciate that. Is we all have bad days, and okay, we can accept that, but your performance across all of your time is seen by many people in paramedic school, and that may set the tone for your career moving forward, right?
Yeah, and you would be very surprised, or maybe not, when you find out that how much those people cross, right? That doesn't, I mean, my first teaching job I got because of somebody I went to paramedic school with, and they heard that I became an instructor, and they called and they asked me if I was interested in teaching somewhere. The assistant chief at the department I started working on in my career, a few years later, I wasn't working there anymore, and heard I had started at UH and asked me to help with a particular program. So that all, and we still teach together today. So that all circles back around really quickly, and you'd be surprised that even some of those relationships you made in school, how long those memories last, good, bad, or otherwise.
Those relationships last.
Yeah.
I think I told the story about a colleague from up here in Ohio left, went to middle of nowhere in the Carolinas.
Which is also very common.
Just middle of nowhere country, rural department in one of the Carolinas. Gets on a truck with the guy and he's like, "Oh, you're from Ohio, Scott Wildenheim?" And he's like, well, "Yeah, I worked with him, 1,000 miles away, and in the middle of nowhere, and you're going to cross paths with somebody." So yeah, the number of people that you're away from knowing somebody in the job is very, very short.
Well, that happens during your clinical time too.
100%. Yeah.
As you are in the emergency room and you are going to ride sites throughout your paramedic program, and you're building relationships with the crews that you're learning from and the crews that you're riding with, you could turn around in a year or two and now be working in that organization. We see that a lot.
That set the
we see
tone
that a
for it,
lot,
yep,
right?
yep.
And they're going to remember how you were
That set
as a
the tone.
paramedic student then in the organization and how you treat patients then. And they're going to be, that's what they're trying to bring into their organization as well. They want good qualities. They want good care provided.
So for the person that's out there that is considering paramedic school, before we get to the ones that are in paramedic school, and again, I promise we talk about some of the test things, because where's this class at? Kind of in the middle, right?
Yep.
Kind of in the middle? All right. So it's on your mind, but it's not on your mind, right? It's still a ways off. Ours just our Portage and our Geauga programs just graduated, so very much on their minds. What kind of
Or off their minds.
Or off their minds, yes.
Relief.
Well,
For now.
I guess, yeah. I think you said something earlier. It's just like, well, now the learning really starts, right?
Yeah.
Now it's on you as soon as you graduate, whereas you have more of a support system. You have somebody to ask. Somebody's looking over your shoulder the whole time in school. It can be a bit of a shock to have that. And I imagine even as a physician going from, you guys do such
Residency
a
to-
residency, length of
We
residency.
do, but the joke honestly is like everything you learn. So for right now, most residencies are 3 years, although now they're going to 4, which sounds awful.
Which I'm glad.
Yeah, so do I didn't do that. But the running joke is we learn so much in residency, but there's so much we don't learn. And then literally, I guarantee the 1 year after you graduate and you're by yourself and you're that lone doc in a 25-bed ED and you have no one else to turn to because you're the doc, right? You're going to see everything that first year you never saw in the 3 years of residency. Hands down, guarantee it.
Yeah, it's the exact same way for EMS,
Yeah,
right?
you're stepping the bus for the first time
Yep.
as that paramedic.
Yep.
You have a basic with you.
Yep.
Something
And-
you're the least comfortable with.
100%.
That's the first call.
That's going to be your call. Yeah. Anyway, where I was starting to go with that, and we kind of digressed a bit, but what kind of things does the person that is maybe an EMT thinking about going to paramedic school, how can they best prepare, and what things as far as their own psychology can be beneficial and lead them down a path to success in paramedic school?
So, first thing to success is really your EMT knowledge. It can't be said enough when you get to paramedic school that a good 70% of what you go over is still EMT school, right? You're still applying the same assessments, the same differentials you were in EMT school, but now you're learning a couple more tricks to the trade, right? Now, yes, you're adding IVs and medications and some more diagnostics, but at the end of the day, if my patient wasn't breathing in the first place,
I'd still start with
none of that really
Yeah,
matters, right? So if it goes back to assessing your time in EMT school and really evaluating how were my study habits. Did I really devote my all? Or because it was a shorter class, did I feel like, whew, I made it through that 15 weeks by the skin of my teeth. Now let me do this for a year, all right? So that's, I think, having an honest evaluation of how you felt as a student during that time is huge. But then the question is, how do you really do that and evaluate that, right? So one of the things as an EMT student is talk to your instructors. I mean, at least in our organization, I don't know an EMT instructor out there that's not going to be honest with you about your preparation, right? And then from there, it's evaluating those study habits you had in EMT school over 15 weeks, and do I think I can sustain that for a year? Look at the struggles I went through, because everybody's going to go through some struggles. Look at the same time management struggles, work struggles, financial struggles I had, because that's just going to be exaggerated over my year in paramedic school. And how can I prepare myself best? How can I adjust? How can I ask those mentors? How can I ask those instructors, what do I need to do differently to prepare myself? and then trying to sort through some of that answer. Now, stuff's still going to come up because a year's a long time, right? So things are going to change, dynamics are going to shift, jobs are going to change, and that's to be expected, but kind of your preparation for that is going to help you with a lot of that management.
Yeah, I think one of the things that we talked about on the live is paramedic school is not EMT school, just longer.
No.
Right? There
is
many,
more.
Yeah,
there are more
is,
dynamics.
And
yes.
I think the other thing that we kind of talk about in almost frustration as students, or as instructors to the students, is we tell them what to expect, but it still gets looked at through the optics of, well, it's just a longer EMT school, and it's not, right?
No. The ratio of class to clinicals
correct.
being one of those biggest dynamics.
Yeah. And I feel like every single instructor that I touch on our side, right, is very open about here's how things change, and then about halfway through, 3/4 of the way through, we're like, these are the things we told you about, right? So, we're not saying things to be arbitrary. No, we're not saying things to scare you. We're telling you it's because of truth, and we've seen it year after year after year after year that these kind of are the kind of struggles that others have had in your place. It's not a superiority thing. It's we want you to succeed, and we
Being
can
prepared
predict
for that.
Yeah, we can predict how a lot of this is going to go based on history. What about kind of self-assessment things? And this is kind of
Well, before you go there, I want to
Yeah.
talk about how paramedics was not just EMT school longer, but building on EMT skills, right? And I'll use this as an example. Last night, I had to do a conscious sedation on a patient, so we gave the patient medication. Side effect of that's they stopped breathing. So what do? The most important thing that I could do at that time was my respiratory therapist at bedside. I held mask seal and they bagged. You learned that in EMT school, right? That's the most important thing that we could do for that patient at that time, no matter what was going on. What does the first letter of the alphabet start with?
depends on it depends on the alphabet.
Fair. What does A mean? There you go. So it literally comes back to those basic skills, right? Now, we've talked about trauma and they're bleeding out. That's a different story. We're going to stop the bleeding first before we move on to airway and we become a little dyslexic and start to see. But it really, all this stuff comes back to basics. And honestly, understanding physiology and how your advanced knowledge of your paramedicine applies to that physiology, it really, the heart's just a pump, your lungs are just balloons. It's simple stuff.
Yeah, and if we unwind, let's step into our current professional lives as EMS administration. When we see failures in QA that we have to work through, they're generally in one of two buckets, right? It's we failed at a basic level from the get-go,
Yeah.
right? We were too consumed with something else. Usually it's some cool advanced technique, right? Or when we got into techniques, advanced techniques, those failure points are almost always pharmacology,
Yeah.
almost always pharmacology, and sometimes electricity, right? Whether that's recognizing EKGs, whether that's
Yeah.
properly cardioverting defibrillating pacing. But as a generality, why do we spend so much time talking about all of those things? Pharmacology being the thing. It's like, does it ever end? No, it doesn't ever end. And there's always more in that space. You can never know too much about pharmacology. I mean, I love pharm, and I'm still learning stuff day in, day out, right?
Well, and you with that, we have our drug set in our drug box, and you're probably very familiar with them, but anything could happen from a manufacturing standpoint, and that one drug that's always in the drug box could no
this
longer
time is-
exist.
yeah.
And what you guys don't know from an admin side is we have multiple drugs already on our drug license that we can substitute in, and we just have to
Ready
make
to
sure
go.
you guys are aware that, hey, this drug's no longer available, this is the drug that we want to use, and make sure you get up to speed on what that new drug is. But we've already kind of prepared for that, and we've seen these drug shortages happen, and I've had to kind of pivot to do that. And it doesn't change, and maybe that drug that we're substituting in has a slightly different side effect profile. Maybe it's a little bit more potent, so you got to give a little bit less of it than what you're used to. And if you're working on muscle memory, you can make mistakes.
That's a good point.
I think that might be the drug commentary, the pharmacology commentary may be a nice segue into some of the real world changes and what registry looks like today. And let's build off that drug thing. So as an instructor, I personally I just admitted I'm heavy on pharm because I see that as a failure point for people on the other side in EMS administration. So I spend a lot of time on, I want to be clear. And one of the things that's always been very important to me are teaching drug classes rather than just the medication, right? Here's what you need to know about this medication, only this medication, and nothing else matters, right? So it's been very pleasing to me when this pendulum has swung from when I took registry, we had to know very specific doses of very specific drugs like dopamine, right? We could probably sit here and recite 20 different ways to give dopamine, to this day, right? Haven't had it in our box for 15 years, but we were tested on that knowledge, right? On that math. How do you come to that? And then over time that changed to, we're still talking about medications, but we're talking less about the doses and dosing it because it turns out that is regional, right? What is given, how it's given. We do things a particular way here in Northeast Ohio, but do you think that's identical to the way they do things in California, Carolina? No, right, there's variances, and that's hard to teach because now you're teaching a very specific set of things to pass a test that don't have as much applicability in real world. And now that pendulum has swung even further. I'm not being tested necessarily on specific drugs. I'm certainly not necessarily being taught on specific dosages. Now I'm being tested on general drug classes, right? So what other things have kind of swung in that, or actually very broader, tell us about the test as a whole becoming a competency rather than just a multi-answer question.
As you guys have probably heard in some of the conversation we were having, obviously there's a lot of changes with the registry. First of all, I have good news for you. Many of the things we're discussing are on the open network, right? So National Registry is pretty good about everything on their site, from what to expect walking into the test, to what the curriculum standards are behind it, to the percentages on the test, to how many questions, to the style of questions I'll talk about, are all presented there. So this is all resources that you can go back to. I know the instructors have, right, that they can give you and show you that are there in real information, okay? Now, what a lot of the change went when we shifted away from a psychomotor testing as we used to do it, there is psychomotor evaluation, but as we used to do it, is that National Registry incorporated what they called a clinical judgment component into the exam. So they're not just assessing module topic knowledge, but they're assessing your clinical reasoning capability. Some of that is done through simple, what do I expect going on a scene? Am I most worried based on a description of a scene and my access to the scene about how I get the patient out, or weather, or distance? So some of that is incorporated kind of in a little bit of different manner. Now, there's a couple different style questions instead of just multiple choice or select multiple, which are not my favorite if I'm being honest, are scenario style questions. But one of the things we talked about on the live is I think the biggest importance in that factor is paying attention to a tutorial. They give you a tutorial, or if you remember EMTs, you remember for EMT school, they start with that tutorial. And how many, you can raise your hand, just click through the tutorial when you took your EMT test? Yeah, okay. Thank you for being honest.
Fantastic, right?
And one of the first things it tells you is this tutorial doesn't take away from your time, right? So take your time with that, with this new style of testing, because the psychology of the test, and many of the instructors will tell you that the psychology of the test is one of the biggest components. There are students we have seen that have all the knowledge and they let that test get to them. All right, walking into that stale environment you're not used to walking into, getting fingerprinted before you going in there, knowing this test rides on your certification is naturally going to affect you in some manner. And even just little things like they bring up a scenario and they have two things side by side and you get an EKG strip, you can't see the whole thing. But if you paid attention to the tutorial, you know you can resize the screen and then you can see the whole EKG, right? There are little psychological components like that that you can remove for yourself so that you can focus on the content, okay? It's a long test. It's for paramedics, it's 110 question minimum now. For EMTs, it's 70 question minimum. For EMTs, it's a max of 120 questions. And for paramedics, it's a max of 150 questions. And I'll be honest, I took it a couple weeks ago, and about 80, I was toast. All right. Now, I'm not taking tests for the last year either, but think about how many of your tests are that long. They're not always the case, especially when we're assessing very specific subsets. So in your practicing and the resources that are available, practicing sitting down for 110 questions. The other thing we found is just not in the application of like pharmacology classes is understanding descriptions. When you go through cardiology, if you guys are about halfway through, you've through cardiology, almost there?
Start.
Okay. So understanding the descriptions, when you're learning the descriptions of how to apply these strips, you're not just being assessed on your ability to see the strip and apply.
Call it something.
Right. Yeah. They'll ask you about rules that you'll see on an EKG recognition and what would you expect to see based off of these rules, right? So having that understanding of the application of the information, not just being able to regurgitate the information, is really valuable. So one of the best things I think you can do from a preparation point to prepare yourself is when you're taking tests and you're looking at questions, even the ones you get right, you should be able to explain to somebody. If you can't, you're just regurgitating information. Right. You're not applying information. And I think that's one of the biggest pieces. The information that's actually on the test isn't more challenging. I mean, we've talked about it's very fair.
It's the fairest it's ever been. So, she's speaking, she's taken it recently. I personally have never recertified my paramedic by continuing education. Mm-hmm. I challenge the test every 3 years, not 2 years for registry. I keep my state up, which it's the same test. And our colleague Caleb, he does the same thing, right? So we feel it's important if we're going to be teaching you to take this test, we should have some understanding. And I'm actually due end of this year to take it for February of next year. So some of the things that she's talking about, I got as pilot questions 2 years ago, and I came back like, hey, this thing changed wildly. This is unlike anything I had ever taken before. Because historically, it was just multiple choice questions, right? It was, and like all of a sudden, I'm getting these scenarios that are building. So it's like, all right, we're going to give you this much information, and then how would you act based on this information? And then they're going to say, okay, using the following information, that previous information, but now with this additional information, how does this change your opinion, right?
But they don't really say that succinctly.
Correct.
So you have to kind of pay attention to the information. My really big piece of advice there is every question is a new question. And we talked about this previously too. Because, going back to something else you said, on the medic exam there are 20 unscored questions. On the EMT exam, there are 10 unscored questions. You may see things you have never heard of before. I talked about when I took it, there's still a term I can't find. I don't know what it is. It's driving me crazy.
Completely
Maybe I'm spelling it wrong. Maybe it's totally made up. I don't know. But the point there being, if I sat here like I've been focusing since I took that question on all the next questions with that stuck in my mind, I might as well have forgotten the next 5 questions. So every question is a new question. If you try and carry that psychology over to I'm thinking about the last question, because it builds or the scenario changes. It's like when you get ready to do your mega codes. When you get ready to do your mega codes don't always follow a succinct order. You could do everything right and the patient dies
Still dies,
because
right.
that was the way the steps in the code were, right? The test is the same way. It doesn't, yes, it's computer adaptive testive and it's smart, but it doesn't say that because you answered this question wrong, we're going to kick it up a notch and see if you can get that question this time. It mixes it up in a different order. So every question, you think to yourself, every question is a new question. And I just had a student last week who did this, and he said, I went in and I talked to them, and he's like, you said 110 questions, and I never even heard 150. He goes, I never even, didn't click with me. I heard 110, I had to make it to 110.
At 111.
At 111, he had a mini meltdown.
That's the end of the world, right? I'm failing.
And, he was talking about how he collected himself. Every question's a new question. I just got to keep moving on, right? And so that's a good thing to think about. Every question is a new question.
The other thing I remind anybody that's taking it is, computer adaptive means it's trying to average you, it's trying to figure out where you're at on a scale, right? So
Yes.
to average anything, you have to have a high and a low range, right? So if it asks you a question, even myself, there's an almost 30-year guy now, that'll pop up, I'm like, I have never seen those words before in my life. I have no idea what this is. C is as good as A, B, or D. Send it, right? Because I know it's going to it might ask a really tough question. If I can answer that really tough question correctly, it's not going to ask me, how do you put an OPA in? If it's asked me some really advanced, airway physiology question that I've been able to answer, right? So that fluctuation is not only scored and unscored, it's necessary to figure out an average, right?
And some of that is order of importance too. Like some of it, you can even get a really difficult arbitrary question and you'll see scene safety or airway. Well, okay, then I know what's going on in this question.
Sure. And although nobody's ever come out and said it to me, I actually think the questions are weighted, or their answers are weighted too, right? Because scene safety might be the right answer. Airway's probably also a right answer. Do we get some partial credit for it? Nobody's ever going to admit to that, but
No, they
I
should know.
think probably. But regardless, that's personal opinion only. But even my own experience, I was getting rattled with neurological syndromes. Never heard, but I'm like, this is what? I've never seen these words.
But this is great too, because something to be careful out there while you're hearing people talk. Okay, so you hear me talk about my experience, you'll hear Scott talk about his experience with neuro questions. When I talk to students that just took it, one will say, oh, I had a ton of strips,
It's
oh, I
all
had
over
a
the
ton of
place. Yep,
description. Don't let any one person telling you what they got on your test affect what you're going to go study. Oh my gosh, I heard Scott say on that live,
Yep.
I remember he said study neuro, I'm going to go study
I didn't say
neuro.
that.
They don't have,
It
like, no neuro
still can be
questions.
comprehensive.
Yeah,
It's
but see,
depending on.
that's exactly it.
Yeah.
It is true.
It's-
It is, a lot of it's randomized. So
Correct.
I just happen
I'll
to
give
get
you
a
a hint.
bunch in that space.
It's a lot of cardiology.
Also, yes. Also, yes.
Percentages. They're all
Percentages.
done on National Registry. But you don't know how they're going to apply that. So they could be taking a series of cardiology or neuro questions and using those to apply the clinical judgment, right? Which is
Yeah.
why you may feel
Right.
like you're getting more of one category than another. Because another failure point is you got to go take it a second time and you say, I had all these airway questions, so I'm going to study airway because I must have failed in that. You don't know that. You don't know that. Study everything.
Any questions from any of you that we can try to answer? All right.
Good to go. I guess the question I really want to know is why did they change in the first place? Did it have to do with passing rates?
No.
And then why, or the new test, how do the passing rates now compare to the old test?
Ooh, good question.
Excellent, yeah.
So, I don't know that we know entirely why they changed it, other than incorporating psychomotor into the written exam. So we used to do this whole psychomotor day where a registry rep would come out, they would make sure you had all your I's dotted and your T's crossed, and would do that component. A lot of the accreditation model, as we were speaking earlier, had already started moving to what they called a competency-based component. So when you're doing clinicals and you have that hospital time you do, and then you have your field internship, and then you have your capstone, that is that competency-based model, and you have to be checked off on so many skills to be able to go do that. So in that build, they determined that they felt that the last-ditch effort at psychomotor skill testing was inappropriate testing. It was better to determine you were hitting these criteria throughout the program, all right? So they still had to have a way, however, to test, to your point, the knowledge perspective that was being taken from that psychomotor component. So that's the long answer to what we believe to be the case, right? Because I'm not National Registry,
Sure.
I can't really speak to it, but that's essentially the messaging.
And certainly my belief here is objectivity, right?
Yes.
So even though the psychomotor, we bring a registry rep in and they had the final say, Falon, Scott, Ray, John, we could all be doing, different stations. We have our own natural biases that we have to overcome when testing somebody. Their subjectivity, the way they said it, how they said it, did they mean it? Were they really confident? There's all kinds of things that
Variables.
There's all variables. There's all kinds of psychology behind that too. So if we can offer you a platform that's the same as everybody else, right? That's a way more fair way to assess somebody than, and to be quite honest with you, the psychomotor stuff, you didn't even have to come to class. I could just show you how to do it, and you could go do it and pass, right? Most of it, right? If I just show you what moves to make, right?
How to not hit the critical criteria.
How to not hit. That's a brilliant way to say it, right? I can show you how to not hit critical fails all day long, right?
And that expanded on at the end too there, like not to interrupt you, it expanded on at the end too when we had in theory, the old school way, when you had to go do all the different tests, static cardiology, dynamic cardiology.
Start an IV, get rid of a medication.
Intubate a baby. Like you had to do these certain things, give a medication, and then you saw it evolve. You saw registry evolve it a little bit with that out of hospital, right?
Yeah.
So
Yes.
they were headed there. They were kind of headed there to now you're going to take care of this patient for
20 minutes.
20 minutes during
Yep.
that out of hospital. So we really get to see longer management. Not just
Putting it all
yeah,
together.
that's VFib. Okay, what would you do?
Putting it
I'd defibrillate them, start CPR. Like we just kind of get like the pieces of it, for lack of a better word. They wanted to see the whole pie.
Yep.
And I think that's what they're kind of doing with the test now is they're trying to see that in the most consistent way possible with less variables and no bias. Fair?
I'm happy for you all for that, to be quite honest with you. And I teach labs. That's what I do, right? That's part of what I'm really good at. But I can still teach you all of that stuff and the important stuff and how to digest that information. But it's great that it's applied equally again, on everybody when you get to the test.
So to answer your second question, it's hard to answer right now. So this test, at least the paramedic test, the EMT test rolled out a little bit later, so I got even less of a data set for you on that one. On the paramedic test, it just rolled out last year. And the challenge we've had to overcome is that many of the testing softwares didn't have enough information to truly adapt. Now, some of them were better than others from a knowledge component, opinion-based, but so we moved in that direction to hit some of more of the knowledge, but less the question style. Others just weren't really adapting much at all. And we have classes, at least in our house, that are operating on both buckets, and so we're figuring out some of that. Now, fortunately, we've always had really great pass rates. We did see a little bit of a decline in first initial attempt, because what the state measures is first 3 cumulative, and you'll see that on our website and those percentages. So we did see a little bit of a dip all across system on that very first attempt, but we're seeing better improvement on second attempt. So where I can say, and instructors can back me up if they feel differently, on Previous iterations of registry, I feel like that first attempt was kind of make it or break it. You didn't pass on the first attempt. I think a lot more individuals struggled for longer, where I think we're seeing a little bit of a different shift. But again, it's early enough. In a year's time, you think you've graduated a couple programs in that perspective. I don't have a really great internal data set yet to say exactly where that's coming from. My personal feeling is some of that is psychological, because you go in feeling like, especially some of those first class that graduated when it hit on July 1st, they're like, my instructors really don't know this test. They didn't know this test for the last year. It just hit. How am I ever going to pass this test? And so I feel like some of that component we're going to be sorting through for a while. But of the last 3 classes we had graduate, we did see a little dip in the very first. But overall, I think it's been a decent experience.
And yeah, I'll say it again. Subjectively, from a guy that's taken a lot of these tests, it's the fairest it's ever been. And if you can set your own anxiety and your own psychological barriers aside, you're not taking a test that is meant to hose you. You're really not.
Yeah, I think a lot of that, and that's, I can speak to the fire side too, is where, in my personal opinion, and we have our own training center, on the fire side, there's not as many good test preps as there is for the EMS side. There are just tons, and that's me personally speaking. Some people might disagree, and I'm totally okay with that. But like EMS side, from EMR to paramedic, phenomenal test preps. We've tried a lot of them in our organization throughout different classes, and I think they help you be very successful. But test anxiety is a huge thing, and you know, a lot of it goes back to the tutorial. Like when I take a test, I'm a long test taker. I know that, so you have to be very honest with yourself. And like one thing we talked about it on the recorded session, I absolutely hate the clock on the screen. It will drive me, like, I don't know why, I just don't like it. But if you read the tutorial, I can make it go away. And then if I want to check on it every so often, I will. But if you're going to be that person that's going to read the question and answer the question and look at the clock, and then read the question, answer the question, look at the clock, make the clock go away. You're going to have enough time. You're not going to run out of time. But we've experienced students personally that have gone through our programs, even fire-based, where just they have so much test anxiety, or they put so much pressure on themselves, and they tell everybody, hey, I'm taking this test today, and then they know when it is, they know when it's over, and then their phone's blowing up. So some of the things that you guys can do to adjust that, and I think test anxiety is a huge thing.
Test anxiety and testing skills.
Yes.
I think how many of you guys felt really comfortable coming into a paramedic and an EMT program with your testing skills? How many feel good taking tests? Okay.
Whopping
very
one.
small percentage.
Yes.
I think I got a second one back there, right? So
1.5.
I mean,
I'll do you something different. I was a great test taker until it came to medical school tests, and I was not great at it. They're different.
Well,
it's different.
It's different, and it's the strategy of the test. And so if you're already not comfortable with that and you're trying to learn the testing strategy throughout the program, I think the amount of prep is minimal. I tell students all the time, instead of scrolling on Facebook, and I know this is a tough one, right? But instead of scrolling Facebook when you're sitting on the couch in the evening, you take 5 questions. They may be 5 questions you know nothing about. But taking those 5 questions on whatever test prep of your choice is going to be better than taking no questions at all. You don't have to take 150 long tests. And I think that's what students tend to get hung up on, is they're like, oh my gosh, I got to study and I got to practice. Well, if I try and make myself sit down and study for 2 hours and I'm distracted and trying to make myself focus, I'm not getting anything out of that. And, oh, by the way, I'm going to test in a very uncomfortable environment, so why am I doing this at home in my office where I feel good, right? Maybe when I'm sitting waiting on my kids at school and there's people screaming and blazing in the background, now I take 5 questions because I am angst to the hilt, and I'm not feeling comfortable at this time, and that's where I take 5 questions.
The pickup line pressure is real. Okay?
Yes.
So like anybody that has kids will understand that. But I agree with you 100%. Do that micro.
Yeah.
Do that.
Microdosing?
Do the microdosing because you're going to retain it well, right? We know that just in teaching any type of EMS
Yep.
education. The state knows that, COAMS knows it, everybody knows that. So I agree with that a ton, is just doing it in small increments. You're going to get to the 150, it just might take you a week, but those might be 150 questions you've never seen before. And 10 of them might help you, right? And then a lot of these test prep questions too, not only on micro retention, but there's also the why, right? And I'm a huge why guy. Why is that the answer? You know, a lot of these will give you instant feedback. This is why. This is what, you know, this is what the question asks. Okay, I understand it better now. You're more likely to retain that in that 5 to 10 question mark versus that 150. So the longevity of that is huge.
That goes back to her commentary of if you can't explain why you got something right
Yes.
or wrong, right, then you don't understand why you don't understand it, right?
But
You just got it right.
doing those questions and understanding, if I've got 4 or 5 answer choices, if I read the question, I understand why each answer choice is either right or wrong. That's literally 4 or 5 questions you just studied at the same time.
Absolutely.
Correct.
Because there's some point, there's some knowledge nugget in each one of those things as to why that answer is either correct or not
Or
correct.
incorrect. Yeah. Great.
And the best thing you can do, and this is across everyone, is, especially on these more standardized tests, the more questions you do, the better you're going to be. So I had to look this up, but the test banks that we use have over 3,600 questions in them, and I have to take 3 of these tests. So there's people that go through those sets of questions twice before they even take the test. So we're taking 7,000 test questions to go take a test that has 280 questions on it total.
Now, with that being said, if you're one that is really good about asking repetitive questions and you're doing it on the same software, you just have to be very cognizant that you are not memorizing questions. Because again, if you can't go back and explain why each one is right or wrong, you just go, oh, I saw that before, I know what the answer is, you're still not getting the same value out of that question.
And I think it's worthwhile. My test strategy was do the question, and when I reviewed the question, I would, if I understood the material, I don't need to take any notes. I would take notes on my questions and more pay attention to the ones I got wrong, and then I'd study what I got wrong at the end of the day. So I'm doing repetition over, I know this stuff, I got this down pat, oh, I don't know this. I'm going to learn it when I'm doing my studying, and then later in the day, I'm going to repeat. These are the things that I don't know, and I'm going to reread
To
over.
make sure you're narrowing that.
And I'm just narrowing down to the things that I don't know and don't understand. And I still have my notebooks that I pull out from med school and even board studying of this is the stuff that I don't know that I have written down. And when I went from my first test all the way through my last test, it was a lot more in the first test. And now it got down to, honestly, when I was studying for most stuff, it came down to a few pages of things.
Post-it note.
Yeah, these are the things I don't know.
That's awesome. Any other questions out there?
So we, like you guys were talking about how much has changed in the past like 10 years.
Yeah.
Do you guys notice, like especially I know you're a chief, do you notice the difference in new guys coming in?
Chief.
Do I notice a difference in new guys coming into the field to practice?
Yeah, like as a new paramedic, like in pros or cons of what
Clinical
you notice.
knowledge.
Like are they more book smart than street smart or?
Right now, in my personal opinion, it's actually more balanced in people in our organization. And I can speak for that on probably the past 2 to 3 years of that. I saw how when, you know, and these relate back to certain things, and I'll touch on a couple certain points that I think are very specific, is, you know, there's instruction to the preceptor. So like when you go to a fire department, if you came to our fire department, all of the preceptors that you're going to be with had to complete an education subset, sign off on it, and then submit back to UH that they reviewed all this material on how to mentor you then, how to coach you, how to give you good feedback. And I think I've really seen the balance from the book to the clinical time with Capstone, I think has been huge. You know, I started to see the shift, in my personal opinion, when they did the 20-minute out-of-hospital scenario. I thought I think that's where it started, in my personal opinion. I don't know if you two would agree with me, but I really started to see the gap from, you know the book, you can pass the test, to now you can actually perform in the street.
Clinical
Because the
reasoning.
old
To function, yeah.
Because now you're starting to function and you can critically think. Because in the past it was always, I have to teach you this, you have to pass the test, right? We'll get through the practical portion. A lot of that is sheer memorization, some repetition skills. It wasn't that difficult, in my personal opinion. But we had to teach you this way to get you to the book. Now I think since the programs have evolved, A&P's expanded, the students have a better understanding of, this is what my patient is doing and this is why. So I need to do this to
Get a response.
and then with that response is now going to give me my next answer. So I think it's actually increased their critical thinking skills tremendously. In that situation, I don't know. Okay, well, I'm going to start with A, B, C. I'm going to go through here. I'm going to get my vitals. What can I start to figure out the why portion of this? And if I do this, what reaction did I get? Was it positive? Was it negative? Do I need to change course? But I think it's very balanced now, in my personal opinion. I truthfully like Capstone a lot. That gives you the ability, because that didn't exist when I went to paramedic school.
Yep.
It was just, they taught you the book, you passed the test, yeah, we did practicals and you passed those too, and then there wasn't a long orientation part to be a paramedic where I worked initially. So, you know, I'll never forget my first call. It was a person that was hit and ran over by a Jeep at 45 miles an hour on the side of the road. They're like, here you go, and you have a new basic EMT today. So it's like, I felt like there was really no safety net. I think Capstone allows you a safety net of, you know, providers that want to be preceptors, that want to help mentor you and, you know, give you good positive feedback. And if you get to that road where, like, I'm thinking this, you have a partner to bounce things off of, because that's how it's going to be in the real world. So I think it's actually bridging the gap a lot for new people coming in. I really do. I think it's giving you the book knowledge, the why, the pathophysiology of what the body's doing, how it's reacting to your treatment courses, plus it's also giving you the practical hands-on experience. So I think it's, in my personal opinion, it's as balanced as it's ever been.
And
I
not
think it's
judged
good.
with
I
a
think
check
it's good.
sheet. It's a real world
Correct.
live scenario that's not being judged with just a check sheet. Not that there's anything against a check sheet. There's reasons for a check sheet, right? But when you're out in the world really interacting and doing that in that scenario to the degree that you get to do it in Capstone, that's more than 10 minutes with a check sheet can accomplish.
I'll give you another example. 100% straight up honesty. In our organization, if you came and rode with us on our squad, we run 2-person ambulances. If you got a full arrest and you were in Capstone and you were the paramedic student, typically if you weren't there, we would send 2 more paramedics. If you were riding our organization, we don't do that. We will send you with them. You're the lead. You have 2 other paramedics there with you. If they call for backup, we'll come assist. But the goal is to put you in that real scenario. You're in charge. Like, we got to do this. We got to do that. We got to start CPR. You know, put the Lucas on. You apply the monitor. I'm going to do this. You know, we want, in our organization, we've embraced that part of it very significantly. To if you were riding there, we're not going to send you back up unless our personnel call for more. So we want us to see you succeed. You know, and we'll help you along the way. But I think that's, I don't know if every organization does that, but we do that a
I think
lot.
that bridges the gap of the conversation of there's the book and there's the real world, right? Because we're really trying to bridge that component.
100%.
Yes,
Yep.
the book is teaching curriculum standards, and that's why it's a little bit different, because it's got to meet everybody that uses that textbook across the entire nation, right? And then you take that component of you're actually riding in your area, doing what your area is doing, live on calls and for real, right? Not just reading it in the textbook or seeing it on a screen.
All of those things that go into the pot to make his experience as a, you know, as chief, as an administrator, hiring people into, you know, and seeing that shift in to competent people coming in, for the most part, ready to go, right?
Yeah.
That starts with A&P. And as an instructor, my optics on this are all of that A&P now gets front-loaded. You come into the program, I am now no longer teaching you what, I get to show you why and prepare you better for taking a functioning test that the, you know, the test like the registry is currently set up to. That has, again, just part of that whole recipe to yield what's what
Yeah.
Ray's commenting on as far as the output of the student in today's world.
Yeah, but to answer your question as shortly as possible, in my opinion, it's the best it's ever been. It really bridges that gap, and I would think for the student, we've received positive feedback because our crews will ask, and we tell you when you come around at our place, this is the way we do it, and we've received positive feedback from all the students. Like, we currently don't have any paramedic students right now because Jog and Porter's programs both graduated, but we'll be lucky enough to hopefully snag some MCCTC students that are in cardiology at the moment, because we went about a week without a paramedic student, and the guys are like, well, what's wrong? Why don't we have a paramedic student? They enjoy that. Like, our crews truthfully enjoy that in our organization. We love having new people in and going over
more
stuff
hands.
or teaching things and asking questions, and it stimulates not only learning for you, but on the backside in an organization, it actually
Absolutely.
stimulates a lot of learning
100%.
from the people that you're with.
Because you still got to be on your game
You
if
do,
you're going to
and
answer
that's
those
great.
questions. Yeah.
My guys have said numerous times, like, we didn't learn that in paramedic school, and the students telling them about it. So it's just times change, but we really enjoy that, and that's just our culture. And I know others share that too. But I think it's really helped bridge the gap. Yes.
Folks, anything else? No? Guys?
That's a great question.
Yeah, that was a great question. Thank you. Thank you for both of them. So, all right, well, anything else that's on any of our crew's mind?
Always pick C? No, I'm just kidding. I'm joking. Just kidding.
When I'm stumped, that's my go-to.
No, order of importance, every question's a new question.
I know. I'm just teasing.
Yeah, I
gonna be like
pick C to
two-
get to the next new question.
It's like 2 phrases I'm going to carry around on I got to get a t-shirt.
There it is. All right. Well, Val, thanks for coming back, and we appreciate all of you students
Coming
coming and joining us here on a night you didn't have to be in class. Good luck to all of you, and thank you all for watching, and we'll catch you next time.